from the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Catholic. I'm Jen Mauro, maybe, and with me today is Mike Walsh.
All right, folks, we're recording in person, and we didn't have an episode last week because Jen was on her deathbed, and everybody else was really busy, so we didn't record anything.
Not on my deathbed.
And sadly, she did recover. I mean, joyfully, she did recover. She is in. I can't guarantee you how many times you're not going to hear a cough. I haven't heard a sniffle yet, but she is back, because she is a trooper, and I appreciate that. She does have a mask with her, but, you know, it's audio, so it doesn't really matter. And she claims to have been all sorts of tested, and she's not ill.
Yeah, I had like 1 million tests, and everyone came back COVID-free and flu-free, but
right.
I don't know.
Listen,
and I was on medicine, so it's just that I kind of lost my voice.
But in the midst of all that, you were still capable of putting out the Catholic Star Herald, which I'm
a professional.
You are a professional. And to all of my colleagues outside of the communications department who tell me that they're sick and can't do anything, I'm just going to send them directly to you. Because how big was that we put out? What? It was a smaller paper.
It was a smaller paper.
It was a smaller paper, but still, you did the entire thing while nearly collapsing. So, well done.
Thank
you.
you.
Your husband did have COVID.
He did,
So
yeah.
he was completely useless to you.
He did have COVID. Yeah, we were in two separate locations again because he did have COVID, and who knows what I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, and unfortunately, it wasn't just the podcast I couldn't record. I couldn't record my domestic church media show, Better Together.
That's true.
We had to put that off for a month, so I know. So thank you to my co-host on that show, Emily Italia, for being,
hey, listen.
understanding.
I offered myself to Emily through you.
You
And
did.
She did not pick up the opportunity.
I did not.
Oh, you didn't even pass it along to her?
No, I did not.
You don't think Emily and I would have had a lovely conversation
You would
together
have,
talking about some annoying Catholic topic?
No, we had a priest lined up to talk about the creed from the Diocese of Metuchen.
We already did that podcast.
We did it.
Yeah, but I mean, I would have been knowledgeable enough to actually be able to go on it.
Would you?
Well, I would have listened to the previous one and hopefully remembered.
Yes.
But
No, you did offer, but I thought you also might go to the Eagles parade, but you didn't go, did you?
No, I didn't. Ultimately, did not go to the parade.
Okay.
I figured. Well, so that happened on Valentine's Day, and just for the listeners, I'll let you know. Ordinarily, I would be there. I was at the NFC Championship game. Thank you, AJ Me, for inviting me along with our children to that game, and I would have, and I've been to a number of games this year, and I would have liked to have gone to the parade, but that parade happened to exist on Valentine's Day, and my son now has a Valentine, and had we gone to the parade, there was no way he would be back in time to celebrate with his Valentine, so I chose love over sport. Let me rephrase that. I chose my son's love over sport. And I do like the girl, so, she seems nice. I didn't want to ruin it for her either.
Do you think that maybe your heart was
No.
a little
Nope.
softened because
No
we had
chance.
that podcast before with Donna, Tavio, Britt, and Joe, where we talked about love for Valentine's Day?
Actually, I want to congratulate Donna for having yet to murder you for constantly butchering her name. Every single time. Ottaviano.
Isn't that what I said?
No.
Did I put the C in there again?
You forgot the N. You always say Ottavio. It's Ottaviano.
Oh, well, I'm
Yes.
sick. What can you say?
There you go. Good point. Actually, you know what's funny? To our listeners who may not have heard that episode, go back and listen to it, because we have gotten so much positive feedback on that one. People really loved that episode that I in all truth, detested doing. Because
Right.
if you're into that kind of thing, I'm sure. But these are probably the same people who watch The Bachelor and Bachelorette. I'm that and not me. So it was like, I just want you to know that between the the Brits, that is true love.
Oh, it's good. It was a good podcast.
Yeah, it was
so
a good
maybe that softened you up for. I mean, but you spent 2 days with your son and girlfriend for Valentine's Day, right?
His girlfriend, just to be clear.
I'm sorry. His girlfriend.
Yeah.
You actually had a date on the night before Valentine's
I did.
with John Kalitz.
That's right. My son and I double dated, me with John Kalitz and him with his girlfriend. So John Kalitz is the graphic designer in the diocese,
Yes.
and he and I go to see every Marvel movie together. When I say together, I mean in the same theater, never sitting next to each other.
That's right. You guys are like opposites. I always love getting that photo. Like
Yeah.
John's in the very last row, last seat.
I'm pretty sure I spend more time at social social events with John than I do with my wife, now that I'm thinking about it, because John and I spend both Weddings of the Sea together every year, and that happens to be on my anniversary. And we always go to Marvel movies together, and, then I roll in home. Jen just gets the I don't know.
Leftovers?
Yeah, basically. She gets John's leftovers.
Well, how was the movie? You didn't even say anything about it.
Oh, it was great. I highly recommend it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
What
it
did you
was
say?
great.
Captain America?
Captain America, the new Captain America movie.
Okay.
It was really, really good. It's
Yeah.
a lot of world building. It's like expanding on the universe a little bit, but it's very, like all Captain American movies, it's mostly grounded in reality, like the actual dramas between people, and there's intrigue and stuff like that. And, it has the usual supernatural stuff like sort of surrounding it, but that's not really what it is. It's about the relationships of the people and stuff like that. So it's always it's a good solid movie.
Okay.
So if you like going to a movie just for the movie's purpose, not because of all the theatrics and stuff like that, you'll enjoy that. It's good conversation.
Oh, all right. Well, there you go.
It's you used to be a Marvel fan.
Yeah, I got tired of it. I'm sorry. I guess that means I'm not a real Marvel fan.
Well, it would appear.
So anyway, that's why you did not go on Better Together. First off, I didn't tell Emily, and second off, I wasn't 100% sure that you weren't going to the parade. I wanted to give you an out.
Emily, I offered. Just letting you know right now. I offered. I probably would have improved the podcast, but that's okay. I mean, although you guys don't do a podcast, you do a radio show.
We do a radio show.
Yeah, it's much
that's
different.
Recorded with a camera.
Yeah. Well, listen, we all know how attractive I am on camera, so that probably would have hurt DCM's ratings.
Stop.
What are you going to do? All right. So, but in the span of that time, the Eagles did win, and that was just a dovetail on our last episode one more time. I'm glad to see that your Eagles t-shirt did not go to waste.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So good job. Your first
got to wear the Eagles
athletic apparel
purchase.
And it happened during a Super Bowl run. Good job. Well done.
Thank you.
I'm sure you were the reason they won the Super Bowl.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's exactly what it was. First time t-shirt wearer of the Super Bowl.
Listen.
Yeah.
A butterfly flaps its wings in Africa and a hurricane forms. Or so non-scientists say.
True.
Anyway, well, we have a really interesting podcast today.
We do.
And actually, this guy does not know the mistake he made by showing up because I have been told for years there is some content that the diocese would like for me to create. And the problem was I didn't know anybody who could do it. And now you've introduced me to someone who absolutely can do it. Whether he'll do it for free or not's a different story, but absolutely can do it. And I'm looking forward to talking to him. This is what he doesn't realize. This is kind of a job interview right now.
I didn't even know, so I apologize. So who we have on the show with us today is Jim Dessicino, and he is the parish catechetical leader at the parish of St. Monica in Atlantic City. Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Did I say your last name right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the way we say it in South Jersey. I don't think that it's not the correct way to pronounce it in Italian, but
that's
the
how
name
it's
is
South
a
Jersey.
butchered translation anyway.
Okay. So Jim is, like I said, he's at the parish of St. Monica. And in addition to that, he also leads tours of St. Nicholas of Tolentine in Atlantic City. And he is artist. He knows everything about art history. He was no, you were not a rector. What were you in? Docent.
Well, I was a commercial tour guide, I think.
Yeah.
That's probably what it really was.
I like to say docent. Yeah. But in Rome. Mm-hmm. So you know all things when it comes to art.
Yes.
And you recently gave a great presentation at the parish in Atco, which is
Christ the Redeemer Parish.
Thank you very much. All the parishes leave my brain as soon as I say at this parish. But it was a great presentation that we heard a lot of great feedback from on sacred art.
Thank you. I was shocked that Bishop Williams was there, and then there was a number of priests in attendance as well. I thought I was giving this just to people at the parish, and so much to my surprise, I was really happy that I had done my research, and I had lots of footnotes in the talk.
Well, that's great.
To make sure that everything I was saying was orthodox.
We appreciate that, too.
Witnesses.
There we go. Well, you know, that presentation sort of spurred us on. We've been wanting to do more actually reviews of our own churches in the diocese, and they all have like a lot of unique art as part of it, as you well know. Actually, in the article there was a line in there that really kind of, when it was first uttered to me about 7 years ago, really changed my opinion on sacred art and what churches should look like. I grew up in a mission church, a Catholic, a former mission church, now a Catholic parish, but it was very, it was borderline Protestant in terms of its lack of, beauty.
When was the church built?
72.
So we'll get to talking about that.
So I didn't realize churches could be beautiful basically until I went to college and went to the Basilica in Philadelphia, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And then I started working for the diocese and realized how many beautiful churches are all over the place, particularly if you're willing to like look into some of the nuance areas of where they are. Don't get me wrong, we have some less than attractive churches too, but we're not going to point them out. But anyway, so what the line in the story that you uttered, which had been uttered to me many years ago, was that sacred art is really an opportunity to showcase the majesty of heaven and the Creator. And once that was explained, I was like, oh, now I get it. Mm-hmm. This is also where the Protestants usually get it wrong, because they have very plain churches. For anyone who didn't get that reference earlier, they're usually intentionally devoid of artwork.
Yeah, or they took our churches and whitewashed them.
Yeah. Exactly. So let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah. What is the that sacred art? Like, what does it, when you see it, how do you respond to it?
Well, I think we could get lost in the weeds about talking about sacred art, religious art, ecclesial art, all those things, but just suffice it to say that it's art that has the purpose of educating the faithful, right? So it's related to related to the liturgy, it's related to the story. I need to move this closer. Okay. Related to the Bible, related to Christ. And so anything that educates, it has to start there. So if it was like very clear in the Fourth Council of Constantinople that we're supposed to pay as much reverence to the artwork in churches as we are supposed to pay to the Gospels. And that's because for a long time, most people were illiterate. And so they needed to learn the stories through images that could teach them clearly. And so that's why we give reverence to sacred imagery, right?
And I know that when my nephew was born, I think I've even talked about this before, like when we would take him to church, which was St. Nicholas Tolentine, often. I mean, when you're 1 year old, 2 years old, and you can't understand, you're still looking at the stained glass, you're still looking at the pictures, and that alone is already telling you a story whether you realize it or not. Absolutely.
I mean, the church should be the most beautiful place that you visit all week, right? Outside of natural beauty.
Sure.
It should be the deposit. It is the deposit of faith too, right? It is the deposit of all things good, true, and beautiful. I think we need to remember that. We have to lead with beauty, because for people who can't afford to buy, art on their own, where the community gets together weekly, right? The church was the internet before the internet. This is where you would get all of your information throughout the week. And so you want the best stuff there. It's really important to remember that. Like, it's not just this ostentatious display of wealth. I think that's where we got it really, really wrong in the 20th century. It has to be the best because we're offering God our best. And when we show up into a beautiful church, we're reminded of that. When we take our children into the church and the music is beautiful and there's incense and there's imagery there, you're creating core memories for those children. And that will influence the way that they live their life for the rest of their lives. Yeah.
I think one thing that I was always amazed at in my few years I lived overseas is that you could walk into a church and be like, oh my goodness, there's a Bernini. You know what I mean? Like, it's not in the museum, it's not in the Louvre, it's not at the Vatican. It's hanging out right there at the church.
Right.
And there's no ropes around it. It's just, there it is.
I think that's a really good entry point is Italy, right? I lived in Italy 2005 and then 2007 to 2009, and I take people to Rome every year to study art.
Still? Today?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Every May.
Mike, I would like to put that in my expense report for this year.
So yeah, I work with some other artists at a company called Rome Art Residencies, and we take artists to Rome. We teach them painting, sculpture, drawing, and incorporate it into those classes, our visits to churches and museums. And then so you get the whole background of the history, both the secular history and the church history. It's not a ministry. It's a private, company.
Right.
But you're saturated in Rome with the history of the Catholic Church. So you just get a lot of that, whether or not you were seeking it out.
Signed up for it or not.
Yeah. And so, just remember that until 500 years ago, there were no museums at all. So if you were encountering churches, that's where, if you're encountering artwork, it's in churches for the most part. And all art up until the art for art's sake movement in the 19th century in France, almost all art was of a religious nature, right? Almost all art was sacred art, whether it's Catholic or another faith, going back 100,000 years, we're talking. So it's only when art for art's sake happened, for a number of reasons, that this divorce happened. And so to any people who are listening to this podcast who are not Catholic already, I think it's important that what I say about what entails sacred art has nothing to do and no value judgment on modern art outside of the church. I need to preface with that because I have some really harsh criticisms of modern art within the church. Outside of the church, it's fine. Go do whatever you're going to do. But in a sacred space, there's certain criteria for what makes good art in a church.
Okay.
Yeah.
So have you had mentioned earlier today that this was one of your few visits to Camden.
Yes.
I've never been to the cathedral before and saw that. You spent a lot of time in St. Nicholas Tolentine in Atlantic City. Often considered one of the prettiest churches in the diocese, arguably. And I'm one of those people, but that's the kind of beauty that I like. Can you explain, what are some of the nuances of that particular church that, when people go to it, that they should look at?
St. Nicholas of Tolentine is a Romanesque revival. So that the Romanesque period is that period between the fall of Rome and the earliest Constantinian-style basilicas and the period before the Gothic cathedrals. So it's starting to reach towards heaven like Gothic, but it's also really representing motifs of the natural world, lots of flora designs in the capitals of the columns, heavy stonework, arches that are arched and not pointed. And so the architect on St. Nicholas of Tolentine was Edwin Forrest Durang. He did St. Francis Xavier Oratory in Philadelphia on the Parkway. He also did the Trocadero Theater, which is no longer in use in Philadelphia. So local people might recognize his artwork or his architecture just from going to a concert. He was an acoustical engineer. So the acoustics are great in St. Nicholas. We have a really amazing organist in Nick Myers, and so the experience of attending Mass at St. Nick's is enhanced by the music ministry as well. But yeah, just St. Nicholas of Tolentine is in a cruciform shape, has a really nice sanctuary. It's rounded. There's beautiful artwork throughout the church from Joseph Sibyl, the Bavarian sculptor who made his life in New York, and also from stained glass that came from Munich, from the now I'm blanking. Of course, I give this tour every week, and now I'm blanking on the name when it's important.
As soon as there's a microphone in front of you, that's what happens. Or a bishop. Either one can throw you off your game. I've had both happen to me.
But you have the same studio down in the cathedral, this Munich style stained glass that's there. Oh, it's Franz Mayer studio. It's Mayer studio, which basically created the template for what good 19th century and onward stained glass looked like. So there's a number of studios that copied Mayer's style, and Mayer Studio still exists today.
Yeah.
They're really wonderful. He would take art historical images and recompose them to make them fit into the vertical composition of windows. So like in the cathedral in Charleston, South Carolina, there's Raphael's Transfiguration of Christ, but a couple of the figures are moved around. And it works. Like the composition still works and it's recognizable. Or there's also this beautiful Ari Scheffer painting of St. Monica and St. Augustine, and we have it in a Mayer stained glass window, and it's even better than the original painting.
Yeah.
So there's some just beautiful stuff at St. Nick's that you can find in the more affluent churches that were made at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And you'll see Joseph Sibbel's work a lot to the sculptor because he did 13 cathedrals and 192 churches. Wow. And now his work's in 6 cathedrals. So like, where did we go wrong and where did all that work disappear to? Yeah. Right. So I'd love to talk about that if we have a chance today.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in all of this? Like, not only art, but sacred art. I mean, were you born Catholic, raised Catholic, and said, I want to do all this sacred art? Or
yeah. Well, I was baptized when I was an infant, and then I never went to church until my parents got divorced when I was 9. Mm-hmm. And I think out of guilt, my mom started bringing us to church, and I walked into St. James in Ventnor, mm-hmm. Which is a pretty church. It used to be prettier, but it's a pretty enough church. Mm-hmm. It started as a mission mm-hmm. church as well. And I went in there and I saw the Reredos and said, wow, this is awesome. I don't know anything about art at all. I like the X-Men.
Who doesn't?
And I like comics, yeah. But this is really cool. And I became an altar server because the altar boys had like a field trip to Six Flags Great Adventure. Yeah. My parents wouldn't take me to Great Adventure, so I became an altar server. I did that for 2 years, and then for the reason that people leave the church in the early 2000s, I left the church, and then I was like as away from the church as you could be for like almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. And in that time, I went to art school. I thought I would study to be a comic book illustrator, but right away I realized that I liked sculpture. Mm-hmm. And my best teachers were sculptors, and so I naturally gravitated towards that. And then I was looking in my art history textbooks, like Gardner's Art Through the Ages, Volume 1 and 2, and all the artwork that I liked was in 2 museums. They were either in the Vatican museums or in the Capitoline museums, and they both happened to be in the same city in Rome. So I said, I got to go here. So I figured out a way to do a study abroad. Nice. And I did a study abroad at Temple University in Rome, and that changed the course of my life. Mm-hmm. Because when I graduated, I moved back to Rome. I got a job. Foolishly, they gave me a position to be a tour guide. And I got to be a tour guide for 2.5 years. And I had this little pass that I would carry around that said I was allowed to give tours of St. Peter's Basilica because I had been an altar server for those 2 years. Wow. Yeah. And this pass, it was from like Cardinal Camastri. It was really cool. I ended up making a big painting of it, like 4 feet by 5 feet, to rimind myself
that you did that.
Yeah. But I was not a practicing Catholic when I led tours of St. Peter's. But it begged this question in me, like, I was obsessed with Rome. I was obsessed with the artwork. I loved Bernini, and I couldn't reconcile the church with like all the Marxism I was learning in college, and then like all of the Frankfurt School stuff that I was learning in grad school. And so it really came to a head. I realize this now when I go back and I look at my graduate thesis, that I was like on the verge of becoming Catholic again. as I talk about it for like 20 pages in my graduate thesis. But I wasn't aware at the time. No, I was trying to answer the question that Jacques Barzun proposed at Princeton in 1973 about the use and abuse of art. And so I was trying to figure out how art could be properly used and rather than being abused. And I couldn't figure that out until Lori Power asked me to give this talk in ATCO. Oh, wow. And so it was like from like 2010 until 2025, I had been struggling with this question of like, what is the proper place of artwork and how do we properly use it? And I started to understand that question when I reverted to the Catholic Church in 2018. But it's been, I've been trying to work it out. I'm just devouring books, trying to figure it out ever since. And I think I understand it now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Lori Power. No, but the point is like you can still be struggling with something for that long, and it just this little like morsel saying, "Come do a talk," and
yes, yeah. Well, like the word Israel, it means like wrestling with God, right?
True.
So I've been wrestling with this topic, like wrestling with the nature of God, and with like what is the proper use of like talents that I have since I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm just like trying to properly order my life, and making sacred art is now like a consequence of trying to properly order my life.
And did that come into play as well when it comes to being a parish catechetical leader?
Yes. So what happened is I came back. I'm going to tell a little bit of my reversion story, and then all these questions will get answered in my telling of this. So in 2018, I had this like dramatic reversion in a dream, and I'm not going to go into the whole dream, but I was told I was going to die in the dream, and then it turned out like 48 hours later, like I had to have a surgery, had like a rupturing appendix. And so I woke up from the dream, and my girlfriend, who's now my wife, looked at me and said, "Jim, are you going to church today?" Which was like the furthest thing away from what I would ever do. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Why would you ever say such a thing?" And she said, "Because you were screaming about how you needed to go to Mass at 8:45 in the morning." Oh, wow. And it was like 7:45 at that time. And so I knew that I had to do something, because I was like, I woke up in a sweat. The dream scared me so much. And I went to my phone and Googled Catholic Mass near me, and St. Nicholas in Egg Harbor City, where I was living at the time, had a Mass at 8:45.
Oh, boy.
So I humbled myself and went to Mass, and I was very confused because all the responses were different. I hadn't been to Mass in so long.
Right. Yeah.
All the responses were different.
Yeah.
And I grabbed the priest afterwards, and I grabbed him by like the lapel, and I said, "I have to make a confession." He said, "Well, you can schedule that." I said, "No, right now." And so he took me to the confessional, and I made my first confession since I was like a early teenager.
Wow.
And I'm really happy that I did that. It was Father Tom Barcelona. He doesn't know this because we have no relationship after it. He was probably trying to leave to do something with the Eagles. But it changed my life.
Yeah.
That confession. And then he said at the end of it, "Welcome back. We'll see you next week." I said, "That's it?" And he's like, "That's it." And so I came back into the church. That was 2018. In 2020, I lost my father and my best friend on the same day.
Oh, wow.
And then I lost like 8 other people, like my wife's father a little bit before that. So he died in October. And then I lost my best friend and my father in January of 2020. Oh. Then we almost lost the business, Romart Residencies, because of the shutdown of everything, right? Italy shut down first. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we had to return a ton of money to people. And then we lost my wife's mother, and then I lost the friend who helped me walk through most of this time. He took his own life on the next Halloween.
Oh, wow.
So it was just like hit after hit after hit. And I didn't know, I had to like fully surrender to God at that point and go from like curious Catholic reversion to like, full participating member in the church. Yeah. And so I just remember like crying out to God, like, what am I supposed to do? And it hit me in the head like a 2x4. He said, "You're supposed to repair religious statuary, you dummy."
Very specific.
Wow, that is very specific.
And then, so like 6 hours later, I get a phone call from Dori Papadimitriou, who runs Mud Girl Studios in Atlantic City. And she's in the St. Michael's lofts. And she said, "Hey, Jim, the caretaker of St. Michael's Church is looking for someone to make new hands for the statue of Our Lady that you used for the Wedding of the Sea. And I'm a potter, but I know that you sculpt figures. Would you be interested in doing this?" And he said, "You have no idea how interested I am in doing this kind of work. Tell him I will do it for free." Oh, wow. And so I went and I met with this gentleman. His name is Rich Negro, and he's a Sicilian, so we could speak in Italian together, and it was really fun. And all of a sudden, I'm like volunteering, working for the church, making the hands of a statue of the Virgin Mary that's going to be used in procession. That'll be seen by thousands of people. And from that moment, I was like hooked. Yeah. And right after that, Father Mohan got installed as our pastor, and I said, if there's anybody who can rehabilitate my relationship with priests, it's going to be a guy who's my same age and in my area. And so I asked him to go get a beer, and we talked, and then we became friends, and that led to me doing more volunteer work and some paid restoration for other parishes. And then there was this vacancy at our church. It was in the bulletin for like 6 months that they needed a PCL or a DRE. And my wife said, "Hey, Jim, we're pregnant with our second child. You need to get a job with health insurance. You really like church. Why don't you go work at church?" And so I thought I would apply to be on the maintenance team because I'm pretty handy. And then Father Mohan said to me that, why don't I try to apply to be the PCL? And I said, I don't think I'm at all qualified to be in ministry. But I had a meeting. Lee Delmonica interviewed me with Father Mohan, and it was like a 2.5 hour long interview. And because someone, my friend, Dr. Jem Sullivan, helped write the new directory for catechesis, and beauty is now listed as a source of catechesis, it was available to someone like me as an artist to try to approach catechesis through beauty. And so that's how it happened. So they're saying, whatever we've done for the last 40 years hasn't worked as a church in America, right? Or maybe as a church in Europe and America hasn't worked. So why don't we try something different that's actually more traditional?
And do you find that people respond to that?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, Atlantic City has its own challenges because we serve so many different linguistic communities, and we're not a rich parish by any means. So there's certain basic needs that need to be met at the same time as bringing beauty, right? But it's not as simple. I thought foolishly, if we just like bring this play, or we bring this string quartet, or a chamber ensemble, people just line up. But you have to learn to appreciate beauty, right? And not everybody's conception of art is exactly the same, right? And so I tried some things that to a lesser or greater degree had success, but I think overall, we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
I agree with you, by the way. That's the one thing in my line of work is that not everybody is responsive to everything. Usually what I tell people is there is no silver bullet. It's a shotgun approach. And not a haphazard shotgun approach, but a sort of a strategic shotgun approach. You need to hear all my different elements, hear all my different audiences, what's going to resonate with these people. It's hard. There's a lot of failure along the way, but there's a lot of learning along the way, and you figure out what hooks eventually, and it comes about. But the fact that you're doing anything at all, that's where the success lies. I think there are too many parishes, to your point, in North America and in Europe, who have sort of chosen we can't figure it out, so we're not going to do anything. We're just going to keep doing the same thing we've been doing for years. And you are 100% correct. It hasn't really been successful these last 40 years, so let's start changing the game and find other ways. And to your point, I've agreed with you. I agree with you that looking back at what the church was, what churches were 1,000 years ago, they were the internet. Having them relevant to the community is, and I don't just mean the Catholic community, I mean the community at large.
Yeah.
Having them relevant to the community is job number one. Because if we're just, as they say, preaching to the choir, you're not going to find any growth there. It's important. You got to preach to the choir. The choir deserves to hear the preaching, but we got to hit everybody else too, and we have to find different vehicles to make that work. So what you're doing and what the parish has been doing these last several years has been great, and I would love to see that expanded elsewhere.
I think it's already happening.
Good.
Yeah. So there's been some fruitful, I'm not going to divulge names, but there's been some fruitful conversations with pastors across the diocese about what to do next from that came out of the talk in ATCO.
So give us a little information about what did come out of the talk. How did the talk go?
I'm not ready to spill the beans.
No, I didn't mean that. I mean the subject matter.
Oh, yeah. So the subject matter was really...
No, we don't need to break news today. Yeah. We're good.
I came to the conclusion in reading the gospel accounts of the anointing at Bethany that what Mary did to Jesus in anointing his feet with the really expensive pure nard oil was actually a work of mercy. And Jesus says that, but if we look at the word beautiful, because I'm hung up on the word beautiful, and you look at the translation, in the Greek, it's ergon kalin, right? So that can be translated as good thing or beautiful thing or good deed. So it's why is it a beautiful deed if it's not associated with the transcendental value of beauty? Why did the translators who translated it into English in multiple translations translate it as beautiful? And it took me to going to a non-Christian Bible, to going to the Orthodox Hebrew Bible, to see the translation in a different way to figure it out. And that's because in Hebrew it's translated as Gemilut Hasidim, which means corporal work of mercy, basically. A Gemilut Hasidim it mirrors almost exactly to the Catholic idea of corporal work of mercy. So Jesus rebukes in John's, I think it's really the best way to view it is from John's gospel too, because he tells you who the people are. So the gentleman who says, "This is a waste of money. We could have done corporal works of mercy with the money if we had sold it." That's Judas Iscariot. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Judas Iscariot, who that's not Fulton Sheen, right? No, who Fulton Sheen said Judas Iscariot would be the patron saint of social justice. Right? Not a dig at Catholic social justice, but maybe at the secular idea of social justice, right? He's saying, if we spent the money instead of using the oil to anoint Jesus, we could have done corporal works of mercy. And then Jesus rebukes him and says, no, what she did was a corporal work of mercy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so if you see that as a beautiful thing, and corporal works of mercy as a beautiful thing, then making sacred artwork, right, and bringing your best to God is a corporal work of mercy. And so we need to treat decorating our churches as if it is of vital importance to our faith. And if we don't do that, then we are not only taking away beauty from people, but we're taking away an integral part of their faith. Because, preaching in a white-walled room, what are you actually preaching about, right? There's a lot lost in that, and we see it, in our Protestant brothers and sisters, like their churches are like they're looking for something and they can't find it because they're missing the value of beauty.
Well, I mean, and I think it's been said, evangelization and faith, it involves all of the senses. So why wouldn't there be beauty surrounding you?
Right.
To see, to hear, to touch in some ways.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at St. Peter at St. Peter's Basilica. His foot is rubbed down, so now it looks like a boot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Catholic art is meant to be engaged with, right? We touch things. We light candles in front of them. It's not meant to be this, like, divorced museum experience where you're taking, like, John Paul Getty is, like, basically going and raping Europe of all its gifts and taking it to L.A., or whatever. Not just Getty, not just to throw him under the bus, but anybody who took the artwork out of the churches after the Second World War and put it in a museum, like, no wonder why people are upset and left the church. It's like if your cultural patrimony got taken away and got put in a museum in a far-off country, you're going to be upset. You see that happen, with the Elgin marbles, with the Greeks, right? The Egyptians are mad. So it doesn't even have to be with sacred art. It's just people want their cultural patrimony because it's a part of them. It's a part of their story. And so when we take the things out, and then we replace them with something really hideous, which is not instructive, it damages the faith of the faithful, right? It can actually destroy people's faith. And I think that's like, where I start to get fired up about it is this, and I think people were well-meaning. I think they just didn't understand. But it's very clear, like from different papal encyclicals at the beginning of the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, that we're not supposed to entertain modernism whatsoever. It's the synthesis of all heresies. So why are we letting modern art into our churches? Because like the modern art, it's not just like modern because it was made now. It's modern because it adopts a particular ideology which is antithetical to the church. It's like hostile to the church. And so we shouldn't have things in churches if they're not instructive. And beauty should be there all the time, right? And so if we want a metric with which to measure beauty, we should first realize that beauty, like mimesis that happens, right? So the copying of nature, that's a consequence of proper ordering of your life. And so if you're properly ordering your artistic practice, a consequence of that is that the stuff is going to look like stuff. It's not going to be an abstract color field with no reference to reality.
I agree with that. I find most modern art just to be confusing. But then again, I'm also not an artist. Well, that's not true. I'm a photographer. I'm an artist. I know what I'm talking about.
There's rules to photography, right?
There are.
The rule of thirds, like lines leading the eye, all these compositional things that are there. And what happened in the modern art period is that each successive movement of modern art, it was all reductive, right? So you started... And this has nothing to do with like Impressionism, because I think that that's probably the most beloved movement for everybody. And Impressionism was not an ideologically driven movement, so I want to keep them out of that. It was a technological innovation, right? You had tubed paint for the first time, synthetic pigments for the first time, and a reaction to the technological innovation of photography coming on the scene, right? So that's modern, lowercase m, art. Modern uppercase M art is from Cubism onward. Okay, so in the ideology behind it, where it's breaking things down and is disunifying the human figure, this is where you're getting into territory where this stuff has absolutely no place in churches whatsoever. It should just be totally barred from churches. And as things become so abstract to the point where they're not instructive, it should be removed from the churches, like, immediately.
Do you see them in churches?
Yes, all the time, especially in stained glass from the 60s and 70s on,
okay.
especially in stained glass. But you'll see Stations of the Cross that are almost unintelligible. Like, you need the script underneath it to realize which station it is.
Yeah,
right?
I have seen that. Okay.
So that kind of stuff. Excessive amounts of like materiality, like in sculpture we would call it open form as opposed to closed form. So like if you have like, you can see the like balls of clay still there, like that's not helpful. That's not going to help you relate to the suffering of Jesus Christ, right? It's only taking away from his humanity. So you want things to look like what they are. Right? I think it's really important.
Well, I mean, that very definition goes back to what you said at the very beginning, which was the instructive nature of a church. Like, to the people who could not read 1,000, 2,000 years ago. That's why all that stuff existed, so that you would have some semblance of so if you go into St. Joe's Polish in Camden, arguably the most beautiful church in the diocese, that's the first time I entered a parish church, and it made me think of heaven. Now, I've been in basilicas and cathedrals, and they always make me think of heaven every time I walk in. But that's the first time I've ever seen it in a parish church, and I don't think it's that common. But I remember as it was described to me, that's how you should feel when you're walking in, because that's what all that artwork is there for. That's not to, by the way, I'm not denigrating other churches that don't have the money or the time. If you've recently learned, not all churches have a ton of money. You can't do all those things. So you have to do it in smaller amounts, and it builds over time. Nothing as all of the things that we know about the church is, that's not what it looked like on day one. That's what we're looking at it now, and it grew over time. So, but anytime I walk into a church and the first thought that hits me is not heaven, I feel like the church is erred in its design.
Amen.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there are churches in the Diocese of Camden that shouldn't exist. I think there can be love and joy and instruction anywhere. Just some of them need to try a little harder. That's all.
we can fix them.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I've seen churches, over the course of time, generations, 20, 30 years, have really improved. Even that church that I grew up in is so much better now than it was when I was a kid. I should also note that I misremembered my first time going into a beautiful church was actually my 8th grade trip to D.C. when we went to the cathedral, or the Cathedral Basilica in D.C. And that was my first time actually seeing, like, I didn't, at that time, I didn't know really what the Vatican looked like, but I just assumed it would be something similar to that. And then I went to the Vatican and realized, oh, no, that wasn't even close.
Right. Yeah, the cathedral in D.C. has a lot more in common with, like, the Norman cathedrals that were built, like, right around the time of the Great Schism, which are incredibly instructive churches, right? The mosaics are beautiful, like the Cappella Palatina in Palermo and the Cathedral at Monreale. They're just unbelievably beautiful churches that are super instructive. And they also gave us the format that the Sistine Chapel would use, in the decoration of the walls. Everybody the generation before Michelangelo.
And we talked about this not too long ago on a podcast, how when I did go to Rome, it turned out that as amazing as St. Peter's is, it was St. Mary Major and St. John Lateran that I actually really fell in love with. Just these beautiful basilicas outside of Vatican City. There was like, and the nice thing was there weren't that many people there,
right?
Because everyone goes to the Vatican, so you could really walk around and see everything, and that's why the fact that Pope Francis has said he plans on being interred at St. Mary Major, I think is great.
Be in good company.
Well, be in good company, certainly true.
There.
But it'll also encourage a new group of people to go to it. So.
Yes. Yeah, that's where I first discovered the Tridentine Mass was at St. Mary Major in Rome. Yeah. I went with a French artist. We were both tour guides, Tanguy de Theroux, and we just went as like Catholic curious guys.
Nice.
And there were like 18 priests and all this incense. And, whoa! This is what Mass should look like. This is beautiful.
Oh, just to be clear, I'm getting half my facts wrong. I did not go to St. John Lateran. I went to St. Paul outside the walls.
I was going to ask you if you went there. St. John Lateran, like, it's funny. I never say these names in English, but San Giovanni is an amazing church. Mm-hmm. So if you get a chance to go back, go and look at all of the sculptures that are there, all like 18 feet tall. It's like there's at least 12 sculptures that are all the size of Michelangelo's David that are lining the central nave of that church, and they're so beautiful.
But to both of your points earlier, I just wandered into a church. Like, I was at the Plaza del something. I forget which one it was now that I'm thinking about it. But it wasn't that far from, it was like 2 plazas over from where the big fountain is that everyone goes to
Piazza
see.
Navona?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And there was just a church there, and I walked into it, and it was still the most beautiful. Mm-hmm. Had I never been to any other churches outside of a typical parish in South Jersey, that would have been the most beautiful church I've ever been in my life. And it was just
some of the most famous churches in all of the world are within 100 yards of Piazza Navona. Yeah. So you have like the German National Church, you have St. Agnes in Agone, which was done by Borromini. There's St. Ivo alla Sapienza. That's a really important church. San Andrea della Valle. All these they're all in history textbooks, art history textbooks, and they're within 100 yards of each other. Yeah. It's incredible.
And I would also encourage people, listen, if you're going to go to Rome, walk around and, enjoy yourself and pop into any church you see, because it'll be an experience for you. And it's a very safe place to go. Watch out for pickpockets, but otherwise you're in pretty good shape, so you can just walk around the city a lot. But I would also encourage you to do that in South Jersey, too. I mean, as we drive around, we drive past churches all the time. The Catholic churches are obviously near and dear to our heart, but there are great places to just pop in and take and there are in South Jersey, there's 3 or 4 roadside places you can go into. Matter of fact, I'll be going past one later today, the St. Padre Pio one in Malaga and Minatola, I think. And it's just a nice place to pop in and say a little prayer and stuff like that. But it's also beautiful and hopefully instructive. I would not presume, but I'd like to believe. I will say this: I've never been to a church and didn't feel like I was instructed in some way. May not have been as effective as other places I've been, but it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say something. We only have a minute and a half, so I'm not going to say it.
You can say it quickly.
Okay. The quick version is, living in Bavaria for a couple of years, I stumbled into quite a few churches that turned out to be some of the most beautiful churches I've seen. And one of them, we were coming back from a trip with 2 of our friends who were atheists, but I said, I'm going to go in the church. She's like, great, let's go, because she'd love to go in. They both did. And this church specifically was called the 14 Saints. It was like something unbelievable. And I had to drag them out of there. They didn't want to leave. They're artists, they're art lovers, and they were just like, well, can you tell us about this saint? Do you know who that is? And I mean, that's it right there.
That's the way to get people.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once they learn the history, to learn history is to become a Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Somebody write
that down.
Yeah. It's not my quote.
You could have said it was. You could have said it was.
No, he's an honest fellow. He's gonna give it up to somebody else. Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for coming on. I told you I had a job idea for you. In 10 seconds that I have left, I'll explain it to you. We've been looking for someone to go to diocesan churches all throughout South Jersey and do video bits on each one to explain the beauty that's maybe not the entire church is beautiful, but there's beauty in that church. It could be, showcase for the people in the diocese. I've always been looking for someone who could do that. You seem like be the guy, but you all seem to be a very busy guy. So anybody who's listening to this podcast who'd like to take something like that on, and if Jim can't do it, get in touch with me. All right. Talk to you later, everybody. Have a great week.